Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang gunottarang upajjayang namassa. Okay. Thanks for the invitation, Lynn. And this time I can see you. Last time we had a few camera glitches, or I had a few camera glitches. And thank you, Brian, for that most moving dedication to Tom. We got the email as well, probably quite soon. And we dedicated merits to them. We chanted. Of course, we dedicated merits to Tom and Emma, but it's lovely to also be able to dedicate merits to the others, Nora and Catherine, and especially Annette. And while we were planning out the session, Nitya wrote to me saying that one of the members also requested a small, a few words on how to deal with sudden death and how death impacts us all. The last time we met, Inga had a question, and Inga, as part of that question, mentioned when someone who we really love dies, a part of us dies with them, at least for a while. And that's so true. It's death is, it has a physical impact, on our chitta, it has an impact on our body. It's difficult to deal with. But then life must go on, and we have to find ways and means of not just dealing with it, but at the same time, honoring the people who have departed, bringing to mind and celebrating their wonderful and lovely qualities, all the goodness they've brought into our lives, and coming to terms with probably the difficulties that we have had. So it's a process. I've certainly seen a lot of death growing up, people who've been very close to me, friends who died at a very young age. So it's very, very difficult to deal with. But at the same time, it's an integral part of life. You know, from the Buddhist standpoint, from the scriptural standpoint, not just Buddhist, but I think all religions, wherever there's birth, there has to be death. Wherever there's a beginning, there has to be an ending. And we all know this. Yeah, we know it, but still death is very impactful. And that is a reality that we have to come to terms with. That is a reality that we have to internalize somehow. That is a reality we have to be in touch with. And being in touch with this reality, I think, prepares us. It somehow cushions the shock that death comes with. It cushions our own reactions. It acts as a kind of a shock absorber, if you will. And the other thing to keep in mind is, as we try and work with the shock, work with this very physical manifestation of grief, we also have to keep in mind that whoever has passed away, in this case, let's take Tom, who has been such a good friend in the Dhamma. He's been impacting the lives of so many people. This entity that we call Tom has certainly passed away will leave this huge vacuum, especially to those who are so close to him. But then Tom can also be remembered in our hearts. What Tom stood for can always be celebrated within. The way I like to look at it is a Kalyana Mitta can die, but the idea of Kalyana Mittata is always present, is always available. The Buddha has passed on, but the idea of Bodhi always lives on. It's a possibility in every single instance of our existence. So that is one way of looking at Tom's life. And by really honoring what he brought into our lives and what he gave of himself, as others have done, our parents, our grandparents, our relatives. Indeed, many of the beings who have passed on have had a lot of value, have had a lot of contribution. This takes me back to a story in Hindu mythology. Growing up in India, you're always growing up with stories. So there's this one story, I think it appears in the Mahabharata, I'm not sure, but there's this prince who's having an argument with a celestial being, a yaksha in Sanskrit, yakha in Pali. And the prince asks this celestial being, what is it about humans that you find most baffling? And the yaksha replies, well, human beings have had multiple rebirths and have had multiple deaths. They see people all around them, people who they love, people who they don't love, people, just people all around them dying over many, many lifetimes. And yet, every time there's a death, they are suppressed. They're not prepared. And that's very true. It's very, very true. So then how do we prepare for this stark separation or this absolute reality, whichever way you want to look at it? Now, in the Buddhist teachings, there is the idea of maranasa, remembering death. And it's not a kind of ghoulish fascination with death, or it's not like, oh, I want to die or I want someone else to die. But no, it's bringing into memory and recalling the fact that where there's birth, there's death, right? And the more we are in touch with this, I feel it becomes easier, and the surprise element doesn't quite take us. Of course, the physical element is always going to be there. There will be grief. There's definitely going to be grief that's manifesting with this separation. But at least we can be a little prepared so as we're not taken by shock, we're not taken by surprise, and we have ways and means of moving on. Moving on with life, moving on with whatever we need to do. And this brings us back to this other important element of the Buddha's teachings. And very often we hear the term anicca sanya. Sanya is a perception, and so anicca is everything that is temporary. So it's the perception that everything is temporary. Right? Now, when we take everything that's conditioned, when we take life, when we take samsara, there's always two modes to looking at anything. First mode is the appearance. The second mode is the reality, nature of everything that exists. So appearance is that I am alive, right? And my parents are alive, my friends are alive. And this appearance is very, very real. I have a body, it's big, it's here, and I'm alive every moment. But then if I'm always just preoccupied with the appearance, then I lose the nature of my reality. What is the nature of my reality? The nature of my reality is that I'm fragile. I am of the nature to age. I am of the nature to sicken. I am of the nature to die. So then finding these skillful means of remembering. So one of the things that I've been very, very consciously doing over the past few months is every night my parents are aging. They live back in India. I live here at the monastery in Canada. So I bring up this idea that at some point they're going to die. I have to prepare myself for that. Not going into any kind of planning mode, not going into what will I do if they die, because that goes into proliferation, but to actually feel what happens in the heart with the thought that someone whom I deeply love is going to die. Right? And I think that's going to be a very useful exercise when the inevitable happens. And that's why, in Buddhist teachings, anicca, anatta, and dukkha are called lakshanas. So you have the appearance, which is dasana, and deeper than dasana is the nature, is the lakshana. So the more we are in tune with the lakshana, that we are fragile, we are of the nature to age, we are of the nature to die, then it certainly prepares us, doesn't take us by surprise. It helps us deal with grief. It helps us deal with the pain of loss. It helps us deal with the pain of separation. And at the same time, celebrating what these people stood for and practicing and doing things the way they would have expected us to do, at least in wholesome, beneficial manner. Right? So I thought I'd share that little piece in memory of Tom and everyone else. So then, how this session is structured is that Nitya kindly collected 3 questions from the community and then passed them on to me. So we'll talk about those 3 questions and then open the floor to more questions if there's time. We are a little restricted in the sense that our meal bell goes off at 11:30. So I'll probably have to leave at around 11:15. Okay, so I have the questions here. So I'll read the questions out one by one and I'll present my thoughts on this and then we can open the floor up. So the first question is, we hear a lot about how our sense of self arises during activities. How do we recognize non-self in daily living? And again, realizing non-self is kind of linked to this idea of appearance and reality, appearance and nature. And this is what Lumpur V calls the foreground and background. So I have this idea about myself. I'm a 46-year-old male. I'm a Buddhist monk. I wear robes. I have all these bodily conditions. I come from a certain country. And I like these ideas. These are what I believe are my moral ethics and my values. And these, I believe, are not my moral ethics and moral values, so on and so forth. Right? So that's the idea that I have of myself. Then we start looking at ourselves and then we realize, well, that's not just it. That's not just it. Yes, I am A, B, C, and D, but I'm also not X, Y, and Z. So then this idea of I and this idea of not I, where does that come from? Where does that originate from? So whether it's the idea of self or the idea of not self, where does this originate from? Right? What is beyond self and not self? So that's one perspective. I just wanted to throw that idea out there. Then we also have in the Buddhist scriptures, like the Metta Sutta that we chant all the time, not having fixed views, pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision. And then there's this key element there. It says unburdened with duties. So unburdened with duties is a nice way of translating it. But if you look at it more literally, it says bringing lightness into everything we do. Kitcha, anything we do. Lahu is, or lagu is lightness. So we have to bring a sense of lightness into everything we do, right? A sense of gentleness, not the sense of I am doing this and I am trying to achieve this. I am trying to accomplish this. Because all of these keep feeding this idea that I have of myself and this idea of what I believe in, what I hold high in esteem, what I don't believe in, what I disregard, judge, etc., etc. So again, it goes back into looking at, okay, appearance-wise, yes, I am this person and I have these characteristics, but what is the true nature? This idea of I that I have is nothing but a collection of thoughts, memories, experiences, perceptions, judgments, likes, dislikes, conditioning. It's all this conditioning. Equally, so what is not I is also a collection of conditionings and thoughts and memories and experiences. So then what has come before this I and not I? I would like to suggest it's just this feeling of being alive. It is just this very feeling of being. And then onto this feeling of being are projected thoughts and ideas and constructs of this is me and this is not me, right? So then this kind of ties in with the other questions too. Then how do we get in touch with this primal sense of being, right? This primal sense of being we get in touch with, first of all, by being aware of everything that's going on around us, having a sense of openness, a sense of receptivity, an idea that everything, we have to constantly keep reminding ourselves that everything that happens is happening in this thing called the being, the sense of knowing of that being. Right? Then we can see that this sense of I arises within this being, beingness, tathatha, as it's said in the Pali, the sense of beingness, or the way things are. And then the sense of not me also arises and kind of operates in this, it's hard to even say, it's not a space, it's not, in this knowing, let's just say it's what I am and what I am not arises and ceases in this knowing. If you actually look at this knowing, it's empty. So it's this empty knowing. It's also the knowing of emptiness. It is the primal, it is the original. It comes before the idea of I, comes before the idea of I am not. Both knower and the known, all of these fall away. What we are left with is just knowing. And that's the encouragement, you know, and this knowing is something that's not conditioned. this knowing is not a construct. All constructs, thoughts, feelings, emotions, memory, conditioning, all of this arises and cease in this knowingness, in this emptiness, in this thing that is beyond characteristics and that has no characteristics. So then how do we get to that? Well, one way of doing it is to always keep challenging the notion that I have of myself, right? The notion of I am doing this. I have to do this. I have accomplished this. I have to accomplish this. I am good with this. I'm not good with this. Always keep challenging those thoughts as they keep arising in day-to-day life, because that's what is going to bring lightness into our actions. Because the moment we compound the sense of I, the sense of ownership, the sense of doership, everything is going to be fraught with stress, right? Because one thing that comes along with this conditioning is the idea that I can never be wrong. I have to be perfect. Whatever I do, I have to do well, right? And that kind of goes back to Virginia's question last time. Why is it that we remember bad instances first? And I was thinking about that. And the answer that I came up with and that I could see within myself is because I don't like being wrong. I like being perfect. I have this judgment within myself that, my God, I did that. I shouldn't have done that. How could I have done that? And so that stands out really, really strongly. It doesn't matter what I've done right. Oh, yeah, that's okay. I did that okay. Then, boy, did I do this. Did I get this wrong? Right? And that comes with conditioning. This kind of obsession with perfection, this preoccupation that everything has to be done right. And that brings heaviness into everything that we do. So then how do we get to this apakitchocha sallahu kabuti is by constantly questioning this. Okay, I am doing this. I'm doing this right. I'm doing this wrong. By being aware, by waking up to it, by allowing it to arise, by witnessing it, right? Not associating, not clinging, not owning. Allowing it to arise and pass away, bringing it into awareness of the present moment. So questioning the sense of I, reminding ourselves that we do not have a permanent essence. Everything that we do, what we are is a collection. We are a pile of aggregates. If you want to use Buddhist terminology, that's what we are. We are a collection of khandhas. These khandhas can break away. They can dissipate, right? But there is something that knows that dissipation. There is something that knows the fragility. And if we associate ourselves more with that knowing rather than with the doing, I think this idea of non-self or not self or self, all of these automatically fall away. What we are left with is this empty knowing. And this is what the Buddha says, Yatha bhutang jnana dasanam suvisuddhang ahosi, in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, right? Or Lumpur Sumedho's, it's like this. That's what it means. Yatha bhutang is, it's like this. And the Buddha says, once I realized suffering and the end of suffering and the way to get rid of suffering, then, and the origin of suffering, then I knew things as they are. Yatha bhutang, as it appears. And my knowledge, jnana, and my vision of it, dasanam, suvisuddhang ahosi, became crystal clear. So in other words, if we are able to drop the sense of I, and if we are able to embrace this knowingness, sense of I drops away, sense of not I drops away, then we just begin to see things as they are. It doesn't get colored. We don't have these tinted lenses that are always tinted with our conditioning, with our preferences, with our likes and dislikes. Okay. Practically, again, being with awareness, watching phenomena, thoughts, feelings, emotions as they arise, trying not to run away with the momentum of these thoughts and feelings and emotions, trying not to fix things all the time. I think all these things would definitely make us unburdened with duties. And the moment we are unburdened with duties, then we are not associated with the sense of I anymore. We don't carry the burden of whether I have done something right or I have done something wrong. And there's freedom. There is relaxation. There's an ease with the way things are, not with the way we would like things to be. So I thought I'd share that. And then this kind of takes us to the second question, which is, could you help us understand the difference between consciousness and awareness? What does the Buddha refer to in the aggregates as consciousness? What is permanent consciousness or awareness? Okay, that's a very, very good question. So before I start answering that, I'd like to begin with two caveats. Okay. The first caveat is, depending on who you're talking to, this idea of a permanent awareness or permanent consciousness could exist or couldn't exist, right? So that's the first caveat. Not all teachers agree that there is a permanent consciousness. The second caveat is that this is a very, very subtle question. So whatever I say will answer only part of it. It's only an intellectual, logical presentation. The reality of this is something that has to be felt within, which can only come as a result of meditation, as a result of practice, as a result of being with it, really getting to know it. So then the question deals with two things. So now that the caveats are over, let's come to the question and what I'd like to say about the question. So the question has two aspects. We have this concept called the five aggregates. And in that, there is an idea of consciousness, but we are also told that that consciousness comes to an end. Now, when we listen to some teachers, particularly Lumpo Sumedo, Lumpo Viradhammo, they always emphasize that awareness is the gateway to the deathless. And we can take away that they're implying that there is some continuous awareness that exists regardless of whatever is going on. So we are trying to balance out this dichotomy. Now, before saying what I would like to say, I would again like to say that I belong to the second camp, the camp of Lumpo Sumedo, Lumpo Viradhammo. I've been raised in an environment where, I've been raised with Advaita Vedanta and those ideas. So I definitely can see, can experience, can be with this continuous sense of knowing that exists, right? So now let's look at the five khandhas, and in particular with this one aspect of vijnana. Now, vijnana and the five khandhas is very, very simple. It says when a sense object makes contact with a sense organ, consciousness arises, vijnana arises. So according to the scriptures, there are 6 types of consciousness. There's eye consciousness, nose consciousness, ear consciousness, consciousness of taste, consciousness of tactile sensations, and consciousness of thought, right? And when you look at consciousness in this way, yes, as when the stimulus exists and when this process of cognition goes on, it's there. And then when this process stops or this cognition stops, that vijnana ends there as well. right? So the way I look at it is, and that's very true. So within the idea or within this construct of the five aggregates, sense consciousness or cognition is definitely limited to that one experience. It starts with that one experience and it ends with that one experience. But to me, that is like pausing a frame in a movie or pausing one frame in a series of frames, right? So there is that. So let's say I hear a sound. Sound comes in contact with my ear, and then there's cognition, there's sound. That's vijnana, right? And that's what sense consciousness is. That is the vijnana that the five aggregates refer to. So in the context of that, there is always that vijnana. And this vijnana needs a stimulus. This vijnana needs a location or a locus because it has to happen in the eye or the nose or the ear or the tongue or the skin or in the mind. So it needs a locus. It has a beginning and it has an end. But there is something that knows all of this, that knows the entire process. And so when I look at a flower, I can also feel a mosquito biting me, right? Not only that, I can look at a flower at this moment, an hour later, look at another flower, and it's the same knowing that I had with the first flower that I have with the second flower. So to me, there is an idea of continuum. There is an idea that there is something that knows the arising and ceasing of that consciousness within the framework of the five khandhas itself. And to me, that's nothing but that sense of knowing that comes before the knower, that comes before the I am looking at this or I am tasting this. And that sense of life, that being, is always present. It doesn't go away when we sleep. It doesn't go away when I don't know, probably when we are in a coma, I don't know what happens. But when we've had a really, really deep, restful sleep, we wake up and say, boy, was that good. I had a really nice sleep last night. How do we know that? If vijnana, this consciousness, ends when the stimulus ends, right? How do we know? How is there a continuum? Then we would be left with parcels of individual experiences, and then there'd be no memory, right? So what is it that connects all these processes? So I think that is the idea. But again, this is where language is so the language doesn't have efficacy. This is where language breaks apart. This is something that we really have to sit with. This is something that we really have to kind of tussle with. This is trusting in awareness. It's like how we form friendships with one another. We see someone, we say hello, then we exchange a few words, a few pleasantries. We take that further, we go for a walk, we sit and have a cup of coffee. And that's how you build we build a relationship with awareness. We've got to spend time with it. We've got to get to know it. We've got to build trust with it. Trusting with awareness or trust in awareness. And then we can see that everything that happens, I can hear a sound, I can taste, I can smell, I can see, all of this happens simultaneously. I have knowledge from past experience, which then has an impact on my present experience. Then we actually start seeing this continuity, this feeling of this continuity. So that's what I thought I would like to share. But then this is something that you've got to really kind of engage with. My words can only take you so far. It's only a logical and a kind of superficial presentation of what's inside. So you've got to figure out what's where, you got to figure out what manifests and how you make it. And there's really no right or wrong in this, because at the end of the day, whether we consider Vijnanam to be temporary or we consider Vijnanam to be permanent, at the end of the day, all this falls away when you get in touch with that sense of knowing that's beyond temporary and permanent, beyond, all of these ideas, me who knows, and that is the known. So that's why language can't explain. Okay. So I'll kind of stop there for now. I also have an eye on the clock. Last question is actually fairly simple, and then we'll deal with that and we'll open the floor. So the last question is, what are the differences between tanha, skillful chanda, and unskillful chanda? Well, first of all, these are all Pali words. They're also Sanskrit words. And we see these a lot in our practice because these are words and concepts that keep coming up as we read a sutta or as we read part of the scriptures, anything. So before we go into tanha and chanda, I'd just like to say that desire is a natural part of human existence. So the idea that we should be totally desireless or that all desire is wrong would be something that I would find hard to agree with. We have, the whole reason for survival, the whole reason for existence is because of a desire to live. Desire can then take on two elements. You could have skillful desire and you could have unskillful desire. And this is where discrimination, intelligence, skillfulness, all these things come in. Wholesomeness, goodness, all of these come in at this point where there's this bifurcation of desire into things that are wholesome and unwholesome. The scriptures very clearly say that even if there were no desire, then there would be no desire to reach Nibbana. There would be no desire to leave what is conditioned and move towards the unconditioned. So desire is very much a part of our lives. It's not something that we have to fight. Sri Ramana Maharshi always said that, he's a great teacher of Advaita Vedanta. He always said that there's nothing wrong in looking for happiness. What is wrong is we look at happiness in the world. We look at happiness outside. We look at happiness in places where we can't find happiness. So looking for happiness in the conditioned is ruled out, right? Doesn't take us anywhere. So then chanda, let's take this word chanda. Chanda is usually translated as desire, enthusiasm. Ajahn Sucitto calls it commitment, zeal, all of this. Right? And chanda is just this basic enthusiasm to do something. If chanda comes from a place of goodness, a place of wholesomeness, a place of skill, the result of that chanda can be skillful, will be skillful. If chanda arises from a place of goodness, the result of that chanda will be skillful, will be wholesome. That's what we call kusala chanda, or skillful enthusiasm, or wholesome commitment, however you'd like to translate it. But if the same chanda comes from a root that is unwholesome, then the result of that chanda is going to be unskillful. And that's what we call akusala chanda. So let's say I'm really enthusiastic about sitting down to meditate. That is a kusala chanda. The result of that enthusiasm is bound to be beneficial to me, right? Regardless of whether the meditation is judged as good or bad, right? There's still a movement towards something that's skillful. There's still a movement towards something that's wholesome. So the results of that are bound to be wholesome and skillful. Whereas, let's say I am curious about trying out a certain kind of drug, right? That is enthusiasm too. Only thing is that's not skillful. Comes from a place that's deluded, comes from a place that's unwholesome. So where it's going to leave me is again in a place that's unwholesome. So while skillful chanda that's rooted in goodness and wholesomeness, can take us to contentment and peace, santi, santutti, sukha. Any chanda that is rooted in unwholesome roots, and according to our scriptures, that's raga, dosa, and moha, greed, hatred, and delusion. So any enthusiasm that arises out, that has an element of these in it, it will lead to tanha. It'll lead to upadana. It'll lead to dukkha. So again, enthusiasm, if it's skillful, leads us to a good place. If it's unskillful, leads us to a bad place. And when this enthusiasm becomes magnified, it manifests as tanha, thirst. Tanha in Pali, Trishna in Sanskrit, right? So what started off as an enthusiasm, we've done it, we like it, we want more. I want more. It becomes solidified, and then it exists as tanha, or a greed for it, a grasping for it, right? And then that intensifies, and it leads to upadana, which is addiction. We are addicted to it. We become addicted to it. We're no longer just greedy for it. We can't do without it, right? That takes us to upadana. And where will upadana end up? It's bound to end up in dukkha, right? So I think this is the kind of ways we play around with thoughts and ideas, and this is how they've been presented in the scriptures. And the scriptures always point to the intention, the motivation. Where does this arise from? Right? And so tanha has to arise from a bad place, because there's nowhere else it can lead us to. It does lead us to stress. It does lead us to bad results. So I'd like to stop there. It's now 10:54 or 10:56, depending on which clock I look at. So I open it up for questions or comments or anything that you'd like.
Andamayang Dhammakataya, Sadhu Karanga Dhammase, Sadhu, 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 Anumodami.
Thank you so much, Amarasiri, for that wonderful, insightful talk. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your virtual or your real hand. We have few more minutes with Amarasiri. Norman? Unmuted.
If there are other questions, mine's a comment. If there are other questions, I suggest we ask Jasna first, and I'll ask if there's time.
Thanks, Norman. Tanajan, I was wondering if you would be willing to comment on the use of I guess, hallucinogenic substances for the treatment of depression and anxiety. There's been recent advances in research in that regard. Does that fall under the intention with which a substance is used, or
Absolutely.
are there further comments that you can make on that? Thank you.
No, I believe it's a combination of intention and expertise, right? We hope that the person who's administering these drugs has been trained in this, knows how these drugs would work. And so there's competence, there's expertise. It's done in controlled settings, if it's done clinically. But if it's not done clinically, then, obviously it's that risk is that what you were referring to? If it was done clinically?
That was the idea. Yes.
Yeah.
If it's done clinically with the
Right.
intention of alleviating suffering, what are, I guess, the permutations, pitfalls, and subtleties around that?
Right. I wouldn't like to make a judgment on this because, but then, let me leave it open as a thought, as a comment, and as a question, is that A, it is expertise and competence. B, it comes from a very wholesome intention of alleviating suffering, making someone better. So if the intention is wholesome, what is the result going to be? Has to be wholesome, right? Whereas if it's done with the intention of escaping, if it is born out of tanha, if it is born out of tadana, that's just, it's the same item. But this is where you see, same action, which is taking an intoxicant, same item, which is the intoxicant, but you see how intention becomes so important. And the result of that intention, one can possibly lead someone to getting better. The other can probably drag someone into a virtual hell realm. Yeah. That's why the Buddha, the first verse in the Dhammapada, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, mind precedes all, Mano Seta. Mind is all important, Manomaya, everything is mind-made. It's that importance to intention. It's that importance to Sankappa, Samma Sankappa. It's very, very, very important. Anyone else? Yes, Norman, please go ahead.
So that was one of the nuances, Jasna. That was one of the nuances I wanted to speak of. The use of psychedelics to stop smoking or to alleviate or to learn. And the other, I hope this is not contentious, but it seems to me that we do have both of this incarnation, an essence, a continuing essence, and whatever it is that continues has an essence. It's possibly that we can't, as with mind, we can't know what it is, but it's there.
Very much, and you can feel it. You can get in touch with it. You can, yeah. It's this primal feeling of being. Yeah, certainly. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Well said. Yeah. Go ahead, Norm.
I think beyond that, there's some sort of flavor to Normanness and some sort of skill set to Normanness, and to whoever is continuing, there's some essence beyond that, knowing that it's part of the Godhead. But these are nuances, and I'm possibly being contentious.
According to Theravadan scripture, yes, that is a contentious idea. But, if you read the writings of early Mahayana teachers in India, Shantideva and Nagarjuna and all of them. They speak about this concept of alaya vijnana. So they say vijnana as a place of residing. And there they talk about all of these things being passed on from one lifetime to the next. Storehouse consciousness. Alaya, they translate as storehouse, or it's translated as storehouse. But alaya is actually a place where all these things reside. And that's part of consciousness, and that's moved on. Again, nuanced, but I find it terribly interesting. Chandrakirti writes about that a lot. He has this work called Seventh Chariot, I think, something like that. And yeah, he touches upon that a lot.
Bob has a question. Amarasiri,
Sorry, who?
Inga was
Bob.
actually ahead of, yes, but Inga was actually ahead of me, so I'll wait for her.
Okay, sounds good.
Inga's still muted. Inga, you're muted.
Thank you,
There you
Ajahn. First of all, I want to thank you for remembering my question from the last time we met. I was quite moved by that. And to continue in that vein, Death and I, of course, as all of us, have danced together many times. And what I think for me, what age people die, how they die, given, as you said, that part of us goes with them. When I held my mother at 103, when she died, I held her in my arms and reassured her that she was really dead, because she was scared to death that she'd be put away and she wouldn't be dead. And I said, Mama, you're really dead. And I kissed her, and the grief was very, very different from the grief that I carry for my daughter, who died very young of an addiction, and for my grandpa and other relatives who died in concentration camp. And my grandfather wrote a poem at that time, which we have, where he never questions God's will, even as he was dying. But these are very different deaths.
Yes.
And they affect somatically and feeling-wise. Well, I feel I carry them very differently.
Yes, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah, very true. Very, very true. Yeah. Even in death, there are so many circumstances, so many conditions. Yeah, I remember being witness to my grandmother's passing, and that was very peaceful. Of course, she left a vacuum. That was very peaceful. But I had a really close friend who was killed in a terrorist attack, died at the peak of his career. He saved 14 or 15 people and then took 3 bullets. That had a totally different quality to it. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay.
Bob?
Anyone?
Sorry, Tana. So Bob had a question.
Yes, Bob. Sorry. Yes, Bob.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes. This was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I take you back a little bit? You had an exchange with Norman where you talked about, we have a primal sense of being, is the way you said it, which I thought was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering, is that the same? You were talking about consciousness and awareness earlier. Is does that take us back to awareness, that what some people refer to as awareness, this
Mhm.
primal sense of being?
The short answer is yes, right? It's all the same. But this is where language becomes insufficient, right? And if we try and understand it intellectually by giving it characteristics, we are adding on to it that which it doesn't have so that we can understand it. So yes, in brief, yes, that knowingness is what shines as awareness. This knowingness is what shines forth as consciousness. But then we really have to get in touch with it to know it. That would be my encouragement. That's why the Buddha said, don't believe it just because I say it. Don't believe it because someone who you respect say it. Find out for yourself.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, so shall we close?
Yeah, yes, Dana Amarasiri. Thank you.
So
Thank you so much.
I thought it would just be nice to close, since this is a meeting of dedication. I thought we could just dedicate with the traditional Buddhist chant for Tom. And this is one really, really special piece that is always chanted at the end of our funeral chanting. So when we say that we are mourning, we mourn for the absence of that person in our lives. So in actuality, we are mourning for ourselves, right? And what the Matika does is that it lays out all details about how what we are mourning for is just a collection of conditions. And when conditions are put together, their very nature is that they will fall apart. So this last chant goes, everything conditioned is impermanent. With their birth, they have the nature of ceasing. Having arisen, they cease, and in their cessation is peace. Okay, so I'll just do the Pali chant, and I'll bow out. Anichavata sankhara padavaya dhammino uppajitva nirujjanti te sangupasamo sukho. Anichavata sankhara uppadavaya dhammino uppajitva nirujjanti te sangupasamo sukho. Anichavata sankhara uppadavaya dhammino uppajitva nirujjanti te sangupasamo sukho. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. See you next time.